So a few days ago, we did the live, Mr. Soap and Clay and I, and we were reviewing the live chat, afterwards so we can catch up on everything because we couldn't see the majority of it. It was going pretty fast. And we noticed about halfway through that the image was mirrored. And we didn't notice it until one of the sudsers actually pointed out when I tried to show my cup, right? Because it said something on it, on the tumbler. It pointed out that she couldn't see it because it was backwards. And we spent 2 hours on a live with like the thing in front of us to make sure that we always had video, right? Not realizing that the camera was mirrored. And so I'm on this side. I always sit to the right of Mr. Soap and Clay. He always sits to my left. And in that video, we were swapped, but not in reality. It was the camera. And I don't understand why. Because like this is the exact same camera. And it's not like if I hold up my left hand, it has the ring. It's on the appropriate side. I'm very confused about that. And I have no idea what occurred there. Just found it funny. And that's all I have to say for my weirdness right now. We're doing a deep dive today. I will tell you more about today's deep dive in just a minute. But before I do, hello, I am Mrs. Soap and Clay. Let's make stuff. How's it going, sudsers? Welcome back to the channel. You are at Soap and Clay, where we make all the soapy things, and you are here for day 155 of 365 days of soap. And as I said, we're doing a deep dive today. And that deep dive is called All About Shea. And that's going to be fun. Now, if you haven't watched the deep dives in the past, deep dive into soap making, the labeling deep dives, I think we've done coconut, olive oil, and palm as well as far as oils go. Here's basically the structure. First, we talk about the history of the thing that we're talking about. We talk about where it comes from. We talk about the yield. We talk about how it's harvested. We talk about the controversy, the economic impact. We talk about the different types of said thing you can get as soap makers. And we talk about how we use it in soap and also the substitutions that can be used in place of the thing that we're talking about. So we talk about a lot. And so let's go ahead and get to the origins of Shea because, we have to start where all good stories start, at the beginning. Okay, so how old is Shea? Just like with everything else we've talked about so far, old, like really old. It's been used and cultivated and prized for a very long time. The ancient Egyptians were big into Shea. Cleopatra was wildly obsessed with it. It's said that the Queen of Sheba and Nefertiti also were, which is awesome. As far as shea butter being used outside of Africa and really leaving the region and going into Europe and expanding westward and all that jazz, that didn't really start until the 14th century when an explorer person started exploring Africa and found this cool thing that all manners of civilizations and cultures and tribes and peoples were using for a very long time and decided, hey, this is cool. We could use that. And it really wasn't until about the 1800s that it started being imported into like England. And then also it's only been within the last 20 or 30 years that we've seen a big uptick in just worldwide consumption of shea, not to eat so much as to use for high-end cosmetics. And so that's when really shea butter comes into our lives as soap makers. But for a lot of us, I'm going to assume it's certainly not the first time we've like messed with shea, because we know how great shea is for the skin and the hair and all of the things. So shea butter's been around for a very long time. Where does it come from? Well, so there's this area on the African continent, essentially between the Sahara and the savannah, and it stretches from coast to coast, right? So it is a big ass area, huge. It goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, huge swath. Gonna put a picture up so you just see just how big it is. So it's a really big region, right? Called the Sahel region. And Sahel means like border, right? And within this region is where the majority of all shea butter, oils, fruits come from. And the whole process of harvesting and doing whatever, it's very, very cool. We'll definitely get into that. Right now, we're just talking about the region. The region in and of itself is actually pretty cool in that it sort of shares some of the like weather characteristics of the Sahara, so very dry and arid, and some weather characteristics of the savanna, again, just kind of depending on where you are in that very large region. So shea trees grow primarily within this belt, within the Sahel. And the trees themselves have been prized for just, centuries, if not thousands of years, for all of their really good, important things that are important for the actual region. Let's talk about the actual region and why it's important. First and foremost, the Sahel, it's a pretty impoverished area and people are poor and starving. And just because of the interesting eco landscape and the weather patterns, it doesn't lend to a super beneficial place to like do livestock and stuff like that, or really a whole lot of vegetable oil crops. And so for that reason, the shea itself, the shea fruit itself is used, well, the shea butter that comes from the seed primarily, because that's what you get the fats from. But the fruit itself, the pulp around the actual seed within the shea fruit, is also eaten and consumed as a source of food. Honestly, that was really wild to think about, like when I had first heard that, because I had never thought about eating, shea butter or really any of the oils that we reasonably use within soap making. But during what they call like the hunger months in the Sahel region, which is the time right before you can start harvesting the rest of your crops, right? Just kind of like for me, I grew up in Colorado, it's the winter months. And so in the summer when the crops are all done, we can and whatever. So we have food for the winter. Get it. It's that. It's used as their primary source of fat because they can't really get their fats from anywhere else. So a lot of cultures within the Sahel region do use the shea fruit itself as a source of food. And they also use the butter inside of the seed as a source of fat, because getting the right consumption for all of the things that you need for your vitamins and all the jazz, it's hard to come by, in regions like this. And so that's what it was used for a very long time, in addition to all of the awesome things it does for hair and skin and all of the jazz. And so that's another way of actually looking at the shea fruit, the shea nut, the shea butter, you get it, the shea, across the board. Also, I learned in all of this that it's actually pronounced she, like rhymes with tea, not shea. And I saw that on like 5 or 6 different articles that I read. And so I'm going to assume that that's accurate. And I wonder why we pronounce it shea. Did you guys know it's pronounced she? So the shea tree primarily grows within the Sahel region of Africa. And again, that's where the majority of our shea butter comes from to this day, which is really awesome. And we will definitely be talking about that in an economic standpoint perspective later. But this particular area, the climate basically is a long dry winter, and just a few months of rain. The trees themselves can survive in climates that do not require a whole lot of rain, right? They don't require a whole lot of rain, and they're naturally occurring, and they're pretty self-sustaining. And these trees, how we talked about in the olive oil all of the videos so far the lifespan of the tree, as well as how long it, yields fruit. And palm oil and coconut oil trees, things, they usually only produce for about 70 years. And so there's that. And then we found out olive oil, thousands of years old. That's wild, olive oil trees. And the shea trees live to be and continue producing fruit for about 200 years. It takes around 15 to 20 years for the trees to actually start bearing fruit. And it really isn't until like year 50 that they hit their peak amount. And as with all of these fruit trees that we've been talking about so far, basically they just produce once a year, and that's where you get all of your yield. So I found that really kind of cool that it's a tree, a group of trees. They kind of naturally take care of themselves, very self-sufficient little plants there, and they will continue producing fruit and therefore goodness and prosperity for the culture around them for like 200 years, which is cool. Now, before the whole like fruit thing happens on a shea tree, right? You get blossoms, because that's what happens. That's how fruit trees work. And that provides nectar for the honeybees, which is really cool. The wood of a shea tree is also termite resistant, which is super cool. Don't you think that's cool? I'm into that. Now, the shea trees themselves historically have been sort of protected either by actual like villages and governmental structures, however those different structures exist within the different cultures. Because again, this is a huge region we're talking about, and we're also talking about hundreds, if not thousands of years of different shifts. They're protected in some way from being cut down. And so usually what happens is they will like kind of clear land around it to plant around a grove of trees or a tree or whatever to plant other things, and then leave the shea tree intact to continue, dropping its abundance every year. We will talk more about the potential problems with doing that, later in the video. But for now, the whole idea of having the shea trees or a grove of shays or whatever continuing to exist, it helps out to be like a natural wind barrier, because wind is going to wind, and helps out with soil erosion and all of that jazz. So all good things to be had. In all actuality, this is a really cool study of a very self-sufficient, green, carbon neutral, carbon minimal way of growing a crop. We will talk more about just how carbon neutral or carbon minimal it is, later on in the video. But from everything that we've discussed so far, all of the different types of oils we've discussed so far, shea's a pretty awesome and eco-friendly, crop to have around. Now, culturally, the shea tree is seen as like this symbol of healing and nurturing, and it's also called women's gold, which we'll talk more about later. And in general, provides a very important life-sustaining resource for the communities around it, both within their literal sustainability of their lives, like eating it, but also in a lot of these places within the Sahel region, this is their only export. This is the only way that they can make money. And so, again, we're going to talk more about that later on. I just wanted to give you a broad overview of the history of shea, where it comes from, and kind of how cool it is before we get deeper into all of the rest of it. Okay, now let's talk about the production process, and I do in fact do the quotes for this, because it's actually, shea butter is actually unlike any production process that we've really talked about so far. So much of the other oils that we've discussed, everything's been sort of mechanized, and they use machinery and have found other more viable ways to continue to get their crops in and do the things with the pressing and all the jazz. It's not really the case with shea butter, and I find it to be kind of cool. Problematic, I think, in the long run, which we'll talk about later, but the whole traditional sphere of this just really makes me, I don't know, very happy in really big kind of cool ways, because it's very interesting. So for the most part, the shea fruits, and the fruits are about the size of a plum. They look to be about the size of a plum. And they are for every one tree, right? It's about 20 kilograms of the fruit, of the actual fruit that comes down, which is about 40-ish pounds. Yeah. And so that's the fruit itself, and then you have the seed inside. Kind of like a plum. The fruit itself, the actual pulp of the fruit, you know, the flesh. The flesh. It's eaten right away as like, you know, a fruit, or it can be dried into preserves and all that jazz. But then the actual butter comes from within that seed itself. First and foremost, these trees during the rainy season, so between like April and September-ish, they ripen and they fall, and they are collected primarily by women, and sometimes kids will help out in the morning before they have to go do other things like school and stuff, right? And I find that to be very cool, and that's kind of why it's called women's gold, because women are the primary drivers of the entire shea butter industry. They collect the fruits, they remove the seeds, they then dry the seeds, they remove the shell, they extract the butter. They do this entire process primarily on their own. Some men do participate, and unfortunately, because some villages are, you know, sort of controlled by men, women get less rights into even access to the shea trees so they can continue on with their work. But this is a really cool industry wherein women are the driving force, and I love that. And with all of the lack of, you know, mechanization and really streamlining processes, you are holding on to traditional things that have given women a sense of fulfillment and purpose, and actually make them the primary breadwinners in their areas, which is very, very cool. And that's not to say that, you know, men being breadwinners and like contributing to society is a bad thing for me. I'm not saying that. It's just I didn't realize that that was the case in most any country in Africa. And so I learned a lot throughout all of this research, and I wanted to share that with you because I found that to be pretty freaking amazing. Okay, so like back to the seeds. Okay, so you've removed the pulp of the fruit, right? And eaten it, turned it into preserves, done the whole thing. It's very nutritious. It's, you know, very life-giving. It's amazing. The seeds themselves. Now, this is an interesting thing. So the actual extraction of the shea butter, it's kind of an arduous process, right? Because it first requires you to like boil the seeds for a long time so they don't germinate, right? Because we want to actually extract the meat from these guys. We want to extract the butter. And then after that, you have to go through a drying process. Now, this can involve like roasting them, like actually like doing the roasting thing in the fires or whatever, or just drying them out in the sun for a couple weeks. And at this point, this is when the majority of shea butter leaves Africa for exporting. And it goes on to another country, and it then gets processed in a factory, in a plant, in, you know, over there, over here, over wherever at that point. And so and it makes sense for the farmers if you think about it. At this point, you can store them, you can ship them, you can sell them, and they don't have to deal with the extra process because it's kind of a labor-intensive thing. And so you take a lot of time doing the thing. So if you can export right then and then let a plant do that at another country, cool. Because after that, for everything that they actually keep within their own, you know, cultures and villages and civilizations and things, you then like crack the nuts by hand, the seeds by hand, and you extract this kernel. It's like 2-layer process here. And then you let that dry some more. And then you beat it to death with a really strong thing, like a molcajete is kind of what I'm thinking of. I bet they like a mortar and pestle. They probably have their own name for it. Oh no, it says it. It's mortar and pestle. That. I was right. Anyway, they grind it to a paste. And then they take that paste and they boil it in water. And it's kind of like, I don't know how familiar you are with these sorts of things, but it's like cream and milk but it's like that. And so it kind of separates between the oils and the fats, right? And then at this point, they continue to refine and refine and refine, run through different sieving processes, the butter, the fats, to get as clean of and pure of a product as you can. So that does not mean that like the yellow shea that we get is the same as like the refined bleached dye shea that we can also get. This is just removing impurities. This is not using any sort of chemicals. This is not using any sort of, well, deodorizing or bleaching tools or anything like that. It's again just getting rid of the extra little bits of the kernel or the shell or, you know, whatever. This is an incredibly arduous process that takes a veritable shit ton of water and firewood to keep this process going. So we'll talk more about that later on in the video when we talk about the economic impact of this, but this is how shea is extracted within the Sahel region. In other countries, they don't necessarily do it this way, but I don't know. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, whether it's a factory putting all kinds of crap into the air or it's using, well, that's the thing about the Sahel region though. Water is scarce, and so that might, we'll get to that. Anyway, that's the process of actually removing the shea from the actual seed, from the kernel. Somebody had said in a video, I don't remember when, but I was talking about shea for some reason. I think it might have been during the shampoo bar video, the most recent recipe day, the most recent shampoo recipe. And they said that you can get white, unrefined shea. And as I was going through all of this, I did find an article that said there were essentially 2 different types of shea from 2 different regions, right? And so one is from here and one is from here and one is like ivory and one is the yellow. And it's still considered that the yellow is better. It has more nutrients. It's better for the moisturization, and the fatty acid profile is better. But I can't find that article, so I can't super speak to it. I'm just sort of remembering right now, and my brain is full of all of the other things that I want to talk about it. If I'm able to find it during all of this, we'll circle back. So put a pin in that for now. Maybe we'll come back. So that is the production of shea. That is how many, pounds of fruit you can get from each tree. Again, about 40-ish pounds. And the kernel's inside of a plum. So you don't get a lot of shea butter per tree every year. Now, speaking of all of that, let's talk about how much shea butter is consumed worldwide today. Okay, so before we actually talk about yield and trade and all that jazz, I did actually find the article. Very happy about that. I'll link it below. But there is apparently a difference between the sheas that you can get from West Africa versus East Africa within the Sahel region. And on the West African side, it is lighter in color. It's more of an ivory. It's more high in vitamin A, so that's cool. The East African is still considered to be the more luxurious of the product. It is more yellow in color. It's easier to melt. It's easier to spread. All of that jazz. So there are differences as far as unrefined shea goes. Again, let's go back to the whole thing about the actual production of it, although none of it's really unrefined in that it's completely untouched. Like, you're not just cracking open a seed and scooping out the shea butter and there you go, that's all there is. It is sieved many times over a course of like 24-hour period to remove impurities. And so what we mean by unrefined, when we are looking at it in like a United States or a European or a whatever as an export, and we're looking at it when we're buying it on our shelves, is it was not deodorized, chemicals were not used to remove impurities, all of those things. Basically, it's not refined, bleached, or deodorized. So apparently there is a difference. And again, that article's below. To the production scale, like 20 years ago, Africa used to export 50,000 metric tons of shea. And everything that they kept in-house, they primarily used as a food source. Though, of course, again, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, it's been known, shea butter has been known to be very good as a cosmetic, as a skin agent, as a hair agent, as an agent, in addition to the food stuff. So 20 years ago, they were exporting 50,000 metric tons. Today, they export 300,000 metric tons. It's a huge jump. Huge. And that doesn't actually mean that like production has increased and like necessarily more shea trees have been planted and therefore deforestation has occurred. That's happened a little bit, but we'll talk more about that within the whole like controversy of shea bit. For the most part, the reason for the big jump is, well, because A, the rest of the literal world got big into shea and wanted to start using it in their cosmetics, high-end cosmetics and all of the jazz. But two, in the last 20 years, actual exports from Africa has become increasingly easier. And so there's also that to consider. So now they're able to make really good money off of, their crops, which is cool. To that, when we were talking about how women are the primary farmers and harvesters and cultivator, all the things of shea, it's not just like, oh, a smattering of women. It's 16 million women. That's the Shea industry supports 16 million women. That's huge. About $200 million worth of revenue comes into Africa through exporting shea every year. And that is primarily done not through big corporations, because those aren't really things that exist in this region, but through off of the backs of women and their kiddos and all of the hard work that goes into harvesting, collecting, boiling, drying all the seeds. It's pretty freaking cool. I found this article from like a livelihoods fund at livelihoods.org or .eu or something. I'll link it below. I haven't super looked into the actual organization in and of itself. From what I can tell, it seems to be pretty good, but they are working on ways to, help out the women in the region and provide assistance for like 475,000 of these women. So that's pretty cool. So if you're interested in that, click on the article, read the article. It's a cool read in and of itself. But this is one of the really... Hi, squirrel. But this is one of the really cool things that I found within all of this research was it was very inspiring to see this. We center on these things as small business owners, right? Like, saying things like, corporations don't do a literal happy dance every time, you make a purchase. Purchasing from small businesses means this kid can go to dance classes and and it all goes back into the community, and that's cool. And in this case, it goes back into the community too, and it's amazing. It's in one of the articles I read, it said that for every $1,000 actually collected from shea sales, $1,500 goes back into the community. And so that's a self-sustaining business right there. That is something that could help bring entire impoverished communities out of poverty. And it's a cool way of looking at it. I am cynical just in nature in general though, and while I will cry about how powerful and beautiful that is, there's always something in my mind that's saying, well, but how is that being exploited by somebody else within the community? Because how do these women get the contracts for the exports and all the things? This livelihoods fund is actually helping them do this in a sustainable way so they don't get screwed. But I have to assume that there's some screwing going on. But at a big picture, high level perspective, looking at this as, this is like a women's driven profession and industry, and all of the money that essentially comes from the shea plus more goes back into the community. That's the point of small business. That's beautiful. And again, I'm sure it's not without its flaws, but it did choke me up a little bit, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so before we move on to controversy and agriculture and, eco impact and how we use it in soap and the different types of shea butter that we can get as soap makers, and again, substitutions and all that jazz, let's talk about something else. And that something else is called allergies. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because we started this entire thing out, kind of going a little bit hard, I guess, on shea butter being edible and being used as a primary food source, within Africa. And because it's a nut, the assumption is it's going to trigger nut allergies. However, loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of studies have been done that have found, in fact, that the protein for like the tree nut allergy or the nut allergy is not found within shea butter. So there's that. That does not mean that you cannot have an allergy to shea. Here's why. The shea tree itself is actually in the latex family. So if you're allergic to latex, you need to stay away from shea. And the number of times that people have come into classes at the soap shop and whatever, wherein they get to pick all of their oils and butters and whatnot to make their soap, that they have asked me while we are suiting up to make the stuff, oh, are these gloves latex? I'm allergic. And I say, of course not, they're nitrile, you know, whatever. Because a latex allergy, it exists. I mean, as far as common, define common, really. It always confuses me. I know that latex allergies exist. And so, you know, they'll come in and ask about the gloves, but then they'll start reaching for the shea butter to make their soaps. And I'm like, you probably shouldn't do that. Let's not do that. I don't want you to do that in my shop, and I don't want to have the liability, because there is a correlation between latex allergies and shea. So it is not allergy free, and it's really easy to go on the Google and just say shea butter allergy. And the first like 20 hits you're going to get is no allergens. Consumption. No nut allergies. Consumption. But topically and consumption could be a latex allergy problem. So if you have an allergic reaction to latex, don't mess with shea. Now let's move on to something else. Okay, so let's talk about the controversies surrounding shea butter. There isn't actually a lot. It's going to be, yes, there is the potential for deforestation. Yes, there is potential for soil degradation. Not a lot though, because again, these trees are very self-sustaining, so there's not a real reason to be putting different fertilizers and stuff to make them grow faster and all the jazz. The real problem with the soil actually involves other crops. So you know how I said earlier how these shea trees have long been just really restricted from being cut. They've been protected. And so farmers and whatnot will sort of cut around the tree to grow other crops. Here's a problem. Shea tree, big tree, looks like an oak. It's like, trunk is like 3 feet in diameter, right? It's a big guy. It's a big guy. I'm being a big guy. Therefore, it's sucking up nutrients around, and also it throws such a big swath with all of these branches, right? I should probably put a picture of a shea tree up here. That it's sheltering the things underneath it from getting their nutrients, from getting their sunlight, from getting their rainfall and all the things. And so it's also sucking up all the nutrients from the soil around them. So the shea tree itself is hurting other crops that are grown too close to it. Now, this is something that we deal with whenever we grow anything, right? Like no sunshine, you get it. So, but in the grand scheme of things, these are things that we deal with all agricultural problems. The soil degradation, the potential for deforestation doesn't happen a lot when it comes to shea, but it does happen a bit. Now, the other controversy that I did see didn't actually have anything to do with shea butter. It had to do with a company that called themselves something about shea, that, I don't know, shot themselves in the foot a few years ago because, I don't know, they let like the drunk guy run marketing for a bit. And this company that was built in like the early 90s, and their biggest clientele were black women, decided a few years ago that it might be a fun, cool idea when launching like a new hair care product or whatever, to have 3 white women and 1 black woman in their video, their advertisement. Like that's just, I mean, it's a mood. I don't know that I would ever decide to do that, like completely thumb my nose at the entire customer base that made my company viable in the first place. Like, hey, F off, we get one of you. But that's the only real controversy I could find surrounding shea-ish. The secondary controversy just feathers into the whole environmental impact. Now, in order to take the seeds and get the kernels and then do all the boiling and the processing of all of the butter, the fats. It requires 24 hours of a roaring fire and lots of water. Now, in this region of Africa, there's not a lot of water. And every time you need a whole bunch of fire, you have to cut down some trees. And so that's problematic. I mean, granted, there are things like grasses and weeds and other things that you can, burn, but that still is part of the problem too. So finding, I don't know. I don't 100% know where I stand with all of this. On one hand, finding better ways to continue to process the fats that exist within the shea nut itself for an environmental standpoint. Yeah, no, I can get behind that. I always go to the whole, how do they have like the funds to do it though? Like these very impoverished communities are supporting their entire villages on the sale of shea. How are they going to afford the extra cool machinery in an already impoverished community to not do environmental damage? And so that's hard. Also, I don't know, I kind of like tradition, I mean, I like good tradition. So obviously, if there's like child exploitation and stuff going on in all of this, okay, I don't want that. That's not cool, whatever. But if this is just like a good, cool, cultural, traditional thing, then everybody's happy and not feeling harmed by it. I don't like change, and I'm resistant to change in those scenarios. But, to that, things change. So that's another controversy, I guess, in that there will be an environmental impact. There currently is an environmental impact, and their already scarce resources are being taxed just to continue on with the shea butter exportation. So it should be looked at. It should be thought about. Some of these organizations that I've been looking into, I think this is part of their wanting to get grants and funding to help with this problem while continuing to ensure that the female farmers get to thrive in whatever sense of the word that is, And so it's something to keep in mind, but it's not nearly as controversial as palm or coconut oil or even olive oil. Like, there are no instances of songbirds being killed with the production of shea. So as far as controversy goes, not a lot, except for that one idiot marketing guy. Okay, so next up, let's talk about shea butter, how we can get it, what types, and the fatty acid profile, all the science behind it for how we use it in soap and cosmetics. Okay, now on to shea butter and how we use it in soap. So, first up, fatty acid profile, which is important. Shea butter has 4 fatty acids in it, and it's around 50% saturated fat. So, it's between 40 and 50% oleic acid and between 30 and 40% stearic acid. So that's the bulk of the fatty acid chains that exist within shea butter. Cool. The other 2 fatty acid chains that exist within shea butter are palmitic at 5 to 10% and linoleic at up to 5%. So again, the big bulk of it is going to be the oleic and the stearic. Now, what does oleic acid do in soap? Well, if you've watched the coconut oil video or the olive oil video to that, it creates that good moisturizing awesomeness. It's very moisturizing, gentle cleanse. Pretty scant on the lather though. What does stearic acid do in soap? Well, it contributes to bar hardness in a big way, and it creates a really nice, sustainable, stand-up-on-its-own lather that's very velvety and just delightful across the board. Palmitic acid also contributes to the bar hardening, helps with a bigger lather, has a bit of a fluffy quality to it, and the linoleic is going to be very similar to the oleic as far as moisturizing and gentle cleanse goes. So, looking at that, you would assume that using it in soap would make a pretty excellent bar of soap just across the board, right? Like, that's a well-balanced oil, just right there. Well-balanced butter. Here's the thing about shea butter. When you look at anything online, everybody has a different opinion about shea butter, but the majority of people are going to say You should not use shea butter at more than like 10% in your soap recipes. And a lot of people have different reasons for that, right? The biggest reason that is out there, I think, is something that's just been parroted from Soap Queen for a very long time, talking about how, well, it doesn't actually put any of the shea butter goodness into your soap because, you know, chemical reaction and it turns into a salt and all the jazz. So there's no real need for this. Like, essentially, you're using an expensive product for funsies. And I get that. I get that. It's pretty good reasoning, right? Because shea butter is reasonably expensive, I think. And so that's good reasoning. I can get behind that. I think the more important reason why people would shy away, or should maybe shy away from a 100% shea butter soap, for the record, we are making a 100% shea butter soap in just a couple days. Don't take this as if I am saying you should not do this, because we're doing it. Anyway, the bigger problem that you're running into is the percentage of unsaponifiables. Shea butter has about 11% unsaponifiables in the totality of shea butter. Now, we talked about unsaponifiables a little bit during the olive oil video, I think, but we didn't really talk about what unsaponifiables are. So unsaponifiables are basically exactly what they sound like. So unsaponifiables are the things that cannot be saponified, right? They will not go through that chemical change and become a soap. And so for that reason, you might want to shy away from it. On one hand, because you could be big scared that your bar is not going to ever hit a solution. It's going to fall out of solution. It's going to be a big, gloopy, awful mess. Or you could do a 100% shea butter soap with a 0% superfat, because all those unsaponifiables would be your superfat. We're going to mess with that in a few days. Now that we have the fatty acid profile down, let's talk about the different ways that you can get shea butter and, you know, whether or not that fatty acid profile changes. Okay, so going back to Soaper's Choice, because I love plugging them while getting no doll hairs from them. That wasn't me throwing shade at Soaper's Choice. I've never asked. But also, have you ever seen a soap company or a soap supply company ever sponsor a single Soaper's video? I find that incredibly effed up, just across the board. Like, we're plugging you guys all the time. It's not the point. Anyway, so they have unrefined yellow, unrefined Ghana beige, refined, and organic refined. Okay, so Ghana is in West Africa. So this goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier, right? With the West Africa shea versus the East Africa shea. So let's just click on Ghana unrefined first and see what the actual color of it is. Even though it already says it in the title, it says it's unrefined beige. And yeah, it's super, super light in color. Hold, please. Son of a bitch, I was just filming for the last 20 minutes and my mic wasn't plugged in. And I'm not going through that again. So I really hope that I can fix the audio. Probably won't be able to. I apologize. Anyway, to the Ghana shea butter. It's lighter in color. It says it in the title. It's from West Africa. East African shea looks like that. Super yellow. The description on Soaper's Choice says this is specifically cultivated in West Africa. Interestingly, it's actually giving percentages of fats, carbs, and proteins in it. And it's talking about being lactose-free, gluten-free, glutamate-free. Are they selling edible shea? Wow. This entire conversation actually did get me thinking about how I've never actually eaten shea. Like, obviously, I've put shea in face creams. I've put shea in lip products. And so just by nature, it transfers. But I've never just, like, taken some shea and spread it on some toast. And it got me curious to do so. And then I started thinking about going through the grocery store. I've never personally seen shea in the grocery store for sale as a food consumption thing. Have you? Because it got me curious. It got me wanting to, like, taste it. But apparently there is a difference in the white and the yellow and all the jazz. Okay. So the Shea Butter Unrefined Yellow. Price point, by the way, the lighter in color is cheaper on Soper's Choice by about 20 bucks. So that's interesting. And their price point is coming at 82 bucks for a 23-pound cube. And there's literally no information whatsoever on this. Like none. There's no description, there's no anything. So it's just Shea Butter. I lost power. I shall return. Okay, I'm back. 3 hours later. Love that for me. Weird power outage. It wasn't even raining that much. Here's the thing about living in the Pacific Northwest. All of our power lines are above ground and we have a lot of trees. And like if the weight of they're all very fragile, sensitive trees. They like to break really easily because they don't have to work hard to build the root system. And so they're always falling over all the time. And they land on power lines and things go out. You don't care about any of this, but this is the weirdest deep dive ever. And I am so very glad that you guys are not an entitled audience and you're just fine with rolling with all of the weirdness. That arguably I also just choose to leave in the video because, you know, why not? We're all here together for all of the stuff. Anyway, what was I talking about? The different types of Shea, right? So again, looks like there's a difference between the Ghana, the West African Shea, and the East African Shea. So there's that. There's also a difference in price point. I think going back to the article that I was talking about how the yellow Shea is, you know, better than. Cool. Now, the refined Shea, which is also here on Soper's Choice. The refined Shea means it's refined, bleached, and deodorized. We also have on Soper's Choice the organic refined, which again means no pesticides, chemicals, fertilizers were used in the growing of the things. But honestly, for the most part, based on what I learned about how the Shea nut is harvested, that's going to be true of almost all Shea that's coming directly from Africa. So this is where it gets a little bit important. And by a little bit, I mean, you know, like a lot of it important. If you are pushing the organic thing as part of your business model, the term organic could then at that point mean no chemicals were used in the extraction of the butter from the kernel. So that's something to keep in mind too. Price points between all of them. So it's $109 for 23 pounds of organic refined, $69 for 23 pounds of Shea Butter refined, $69 for Shea Butter unrefined from Ghana, and $82 for 23 pounds of unrefined yellow, which is going to come from East Africa. So as with all of this, it kind of comes down to what you want to do as a business person and what you want your business model to be, the things that you want to focus on, as well as price point. So there's that. Another secondary thing with all of this is this thing called Shea oil. What is Shea oil? Well, effectively, Shea oil is to Shea Butter what fractionated coconut oil is to coconut oil. It's like an SAT question here. Basically, what they're doing within the Shea oil is they are taking out all of the things that make Shea solid at room temperature, just like they're doing with the coconut oil to make for the fractionated. So they're removing some fatty acid chains. I would not mess with Shea oil in a soap recipe for the same reason I would not mess with fractionated coconut oil in a soap recipe. A, it's expensive. 2, you have more unsaponifiables in that. So that actually does change the fatty acid profile. But for the rest of them, the fatty acid profile is exactly the same. So we're still looking at about 50% oleic, 30 to 40% stearic, and then the rest is going to be your palmitic and your linoleic. So for substitutions, well, honestly, for this, you're really going to kind of need to substitute too. You're obviously going to want to look for an oil that is first and foremost high in oleic acid, right? And so olive oil comes to mind for sure. But then there's also like sunflower oil and canola oil and all other oils. But also you want something that's reasonably high in palmitic as well. And so avocado oil, coconut oil, palm oil, lard and tallow are both reasonably high in palmitic acid as well. So some animal fat options there too. But realistically, if you're going to be swapping out shea, you should be looking at cocoa butter is a decent substitution, I suppose. Let me look up cocoa butter. Hold on. Yeah, cocoa butter is going to be your best substitution for shea butter without having to do more than one oil or butter. Because cocoa butter has about 34% oleic and about 25% palmitic. So that's going to get you really close. So keep that in mind. That said, shea butter in and of itself with this fatty acid profile, doesn't that sound like a lot of fun and something that you want to try? Like a 100% shea butter soap? We're going to try it in a couple days. And so we'll be doing that for the recipe day in a few days. And we can talk about what I think its best use would be and all the jazz. Now, to the cosmetic side of shea butter, shea oil actually does come into play with that when you were dealing with like hair care. I do buy shea oil pretty frequently to use for something like Kid Number One's hair as sort of a conditioner, a leave-in conditioner. And I treat her hair with oil multiple times a week because she has that big curl and that really cool textured, structure there. Because the shea oil is essentially, because it's removing the parts that make shea butter solid, it's also removing like the wax. And so we don't really want to build up in the hair. For a shampoo bar, if you're doing a cold process shampoo bar with the shea, that doesn't really come into play anymore because of saponification and the breakdown of things. When you're putting a direct leave-on product, a shea butter is going to be very difficult to put into the hair. A, just because it's very thick and whatever. But two, you don't want any waxy buildup. So I do use shea oil as a leave-in product for my daughter's curly textured hair. For the rest of it, shea butter itself, I mean, it's freaking great for everything in a cosmetic. In a leave-on product, in a lotion, in a balm, in a butter, in a face cream. I mean, it's deals. It helps with wounds. It helps with bruising. It's high in vitamins. It's very nutrient dense. It is really an amazing, incredible addition to all things leave-on. Again, I have to go back to, for soap, Brambleberry's not wrong. Soap Queen is not wrong when she made the comment about the qualities of the shea butter don't really impart themselves on a soap. Because as we have talked about many, many times before, soap is a rinse-off product, and that's what we need to continue to think about. It's only on our skin for 15, 20 seconds. That is not to say that these characteristics do not survive saponification. That is not what I am saying. That's a different video. That's a boring chemistry video. That is to say that for an expensive ingredient, maybe you shouldn't use it when there are other cheaper options out there, and just keep your shea to, your leave-on products where you're going to find the most benefit because it stays on your skin. That said, we're still totally doing a 100% shea butter soap recipe in a couple days. So wrapping this all up, what does it all mean? Shea butter's cool. The shea tree is cool. That thing lives for 200 years and keeps producing fruit. That's amazing. The harvesting practices and the way that they collect, even if, they're exporting the actual seeds to the countries that then, do different things for the extraction of the butter from the kernels themselves, the actual collecting of the shea fruits, of the fruits from the shea tree, and then the boiling and the drying and all that, that hasn't changed in like centuries. And that practice alone sustains populations and helps bring populations out of poverty. That said, the way that they extract and the way that they do the things, it can be damaging to the environment. So we need to keep that in mind. As far as it all goes, though, weighing one against the other, it kind of does become, or the good cancels out the bad, and so it's all fine-ish. No huge controversies with shea. Considering everything that goes into actually harvesting and obtaining the kernel, the price point's good. Like, it's really impressively good considering everything that goes into that. And it kind of feels like this cool small business thing that's supporting and sustaining micro communities. And that's amazing because that's kind of the point of all of us as small business, makers or peoples. And that's cool. Again, I don't have any information about how these women farmers are being exploited, and I'm sure there's something. I didn't find it. A lot of the information from this region of the world is kind of hard to find for a lot of reasons, which we don't actually have time to get into with all of this. And to be perfectly honest with you, after 3 hours of no power, I am concerned that this was just a weird blip in how long we have power again, and I should probably cut this off and be done with it. So we'll have to talk about, I guess, Africa, like the entire continent, in another video, or 50, because that's a lot. It's a lot of history that comes from Africa. Anyway, so that's shea butter and shea oil. To that, I will not be doing a deep dive on shea oil in and of itself. There's not really a lot to say about it outside of what I just said. Fractionated coconut oil, same thing as shea oil, shea butter. So they all kind of get lumped into one. I am actually really seriously going to take off because I'm getting nervous that we're going to lose power again. And this has been wild with forgetting to hook up the mic. Oh, good, it's still hooked up. And all of the weirdness that today's deep dive has been. I hope you guys had fun, if only having fun at my expense and laughing at my life. Really? And I laugh at my life. We have to laugh because if we don't, we'll just not cry. I don't ever cry about my life because my life's pretty amazing. But, it's just cuckoo. Yeah, that this is a thing. Anyway, I appreciate all of you guys for being here for another round of 365 days of soap. I have no idea what we're doing tomorrow. Like, literally none. But this 100% shea butter soap recipe will be in a couple days. So if you're interested in that, like, subscribe, do the things. For all of you that have done all those things, hey, thank you, Sudsers. You are amazing. Thank you for being my amazing, incredible, unbelievable community that does not experience audience entitlement, rolls with me with all this weird stuff, and still comes back tomorrow for another round of soapy fun. Bye.